Hello, everyone. I'm Joe,
And TJ,
and we are the Schoolhouse 302. And this is our Read This series where we bring to you books that we love, that we feel will resonate with educational leaders, really on the topic that we're focused on for the month. But really, TJ, as you know, it spreads across many different situations, thoughts, issues, and so on. But this month, TJ and I decided to focus a little bit differently and talk about challenging situations, crisis that leaders may find themselves in. And this was born from a book that we're very fortunate to be published with Corwin, with a third author, Connie Hamilton. And we're super stoked about this book, what it means. And we'll get more to that down the road, but we're still enamored with this topic because it's so challenging for leaders to function well and really thrive in crisis. We don't just want to survive, we want to thrive. Great leaders do this. And yet, sometimes we may not find ourselves, TJ, in a crisis as great as like the pandemic, but rarely does a week go by where leaders don't find themselves in very difficult situations.
it's so
How
true.
about you? How about you introduce the first book and then dig into that whole idea a little more?
Sure thing, Joe. And you're right about that for school leaders. It's tough because sometimes we're in the midst of a crisis, and the things that are actually a crisis we're diverted from. And so we have to think about whether or not this problem is persistent, whether or not it's urgent, whether or not it's important, and whether or not we need to deal with it right now. And so great leaders are always thinking about their thinking and thinking about how they think about things. And I couldn't think of a better author to introduce about that than John Maxwell. And the book I'm sharing here is called Failing Forward. And the subtitle is Turning Mistakes into Stepping Stones for Success. I'm pointing out a couple features of the book, Joe, and some reasons why we're recommending it. Each of the book's sections has its own title, not just the chapters. One of the sections is called Do You Mind Changing Your Mind? And the implication there is that we ought to be able to change our minds, and we ought to focus on whether or not we're bothered by that and what are the things that do change our minds. And I know you and we make a lot of clear points about things, and we can have conviction about stuff, but something that we have in common is that we like when other people change our minds. And I like when you change my mind, and I like to change your mind. But leaders need to think about that. And that's why I like John Maxwell. All of his books are about the way leaders think. Now, there's another side of the coin in terms of doing, but I don't know if there are enough books out there about how leaders think. And he's got a ton of them. And this concept of failing forward is just about making mistakes, trying things. You can't have the probability of success as 100% if you're trying to be innovative and trying to try new things. Proof is the enemy of progress, as you know. And so fail forward as a leader, pick up John Maxwell's book. And I just can't believe how awesome this book is and the stories that John tells in it.
Well, what an incredible storyteller he is. We are definitely attracted to his work because not only does it make it just a ton of sense, it resonates with all of us. And the stories he tells really are things that attract us because I think we deal with them, right? Very, very practical approach. And I think we think of falling forward, but if we're going to do it, fail forward, fail right. And I love the fact, TJ, that you bring out the idea that, it's okay to change your mind. I think leaders struggle with this, and feel free to touch on this more because, it's like we got to be decisive. And in our decisiveness, we feel like that has to be rigid. Decisive and rigid are not the same things.
And then also, you don't have to be right about everything. And you certainly don't have to be right about it the first time. And there's a lot of power in saying, Yeah, well, that's what I thought then. And here's the way we tweaked it, or I think totally differently about it now. We learned that from Richard Elmore. And so it's so important. But I think that's all about minding your thinking and being okay with saying, I don't know. Let's try something different than we've tried in the past. And knowing that there's not always proof in what we're going to put into practice. Before we put it into practice. We have to collect the evidence, and you have to fail to be able to do that, or at least understand that the notion is there that we might, and that's okay.
It is okay. And I think there's a process we're going through that we're ensuring that we're still moving towards our goals, which is the book that I chose, also a John Maxwell book. Good leaders ask great questions. I love this book for a couple different reasons. He seesaws his approach in this book. The first part are questions leaders should ask. So he gets into that. And you know what? There are some good canned questions in here that I would encourage our listeners to even memorize. You know, for example, if you're not sure how to approach a problem sometimes, you can begin with just identifying truly what is a problem. Like, what is a problem we're really dealing with here? Why do we have this problem? He talks about, approaching things that plainly. And I don't want simplicity to be mistaken for a lack of sophistication, because that is just not the case. The seesaw, though, when it tips to the other side, he gets into questions others have asked him. And it's powerful. It's about delegation, about being wrong, reflecting as a leader. How do you lead yourself better than anyone else? And he has a litany of questions associated with that force the reader to reflect. So not only do you get a couple chapters on great questions, leaders should ask, you also get into the whole idea of becoming an effective leader through various questions he's been asked. And some are just very poignant, very direct, and similar to the style you already described. He lifts the reader through just sage advice. And that's why we're big Maxwell fans and have been for quite a while. As you know, TJ, we love to leave our listeners, though, with a tip. What is your tip for this month?
So I couldn't help but have the tip that readers, all leaders are readers. All readers aren't leaders, but all leaders are readers. To read multiple books by the same author. Now, we've talked about this tip before, where we've recommended to read multiple books by the same subject with the same subject. But in this case, it's a little bit different of a spin, which is to take an author's work and try to do a deep dive into the philosophy of that author and into the work of that author. So we've given you 2 books by John Maxwell. If we look at John Maxwell, for example, I think there are a billion others, because he's written a billion leadership books. I'm exaggerating, but it's up there. You could spend this year reading John Maxwell books alone, and probably not scratch the surface. But here are 2 books about thinking. And Joe's right about questions. We tend to think that leaders are going to have the skill of asking good questions, maybe through feedback. And that's not true either. Asking good questions is a skill. Thinking is a skill. Learning to fail forward is a skill. And so we need to study these skills. And John's got a ton of stuff on both of those, in particular, failing forward and asking better questions. That's it, folks. Read this series on our One Thing Series podcast at theschoolhouse302.com. Don't forget to go to theschoolhouse302.com for leadership blogs, podcasts, books to read, and more, always to help you lead better and grow faster. We hope to see you next time. And as always, we appreciate a like, a follow, or a share.